We're in a series that we started about 3 weeks ago now. I think, no, 4 weeks ago now, that we're calling Missing the Mark. And what we've been doing is we've been talking about these things that we do that cause us to miss the mark in the relationships that we have. You see, God intended for us to be in relationship with the people that he places in our lives. And he intended for those relationships to be mature, healthy, growing relationships. But there are things that we do that chip away at those relationships, that injured those relationships. And if we're not careful, they basically destroy those relationships. So over the course of this series, we've talked about the issue of gossip, and we said nobody here gossips, right? We know, yeah, that's a lie. And then Pastor John, when Dawn and I were on vacation, Pastor John talked about envy. None of us covet what our neighbors have, do we? We don't envy at all. That's a lie too. And amazingly, last week I talked about lying. We all lie. Sometimes it's little white lies, it's little fibs, but you know what? To God, it's a lie. And lying to the people that he's put us in relationship with does nothing to strengthen that relationship. It destroys it. I want to continue the series this morning talking about the issue of respect. You know, respect is something that we should just normally give to the people that are in our lives. The problem is, a lot of times, without even thinking about it, we disrespect them. And disrespect, like all these other things we've talked about, will erode the relationships that are in our life. And if we do it long enough, it'll destroy the relationships that are in our lives. So I want to talk about and look at this whole idea of disrespect this morning. I want to talk about what we do, what we don't do, and how we can kind of fix that. But to begin with, let me ask you a question. You can raise your hand on this one. How many of you have ever shopped at J.C. Penney's? We all have, right? And now, quite honestly, it's kind of hard to find one anymore. Most of the ones around Hampton Roads have closed down in all of the malls. There's still J.C. Penney's online. But we've all been there. We've all shopped there. I bet you didn't know this, though. When the store actually was formed in 1908, it wasn't called J.C. Penney's. A gentleman by the name of James Penny Cash started the store. But when he started it, he called it, are you ready for this? Any idea what he called it? Any idea at all? Penny Cash? That would have been great, right? No. He called it the Golden Rule Store. The Golden Rule Store. And he really was innovative for his time. Like I said, it was 1908. And what he actually did, he said, I don't like the term employee. So he was one of the very first people in the business world to say the people that worked for him were associates. They were associates. And the one thing he told them to do was to respect every customer that ever came in the store. He said, what I want you to do is treat them the way you would want to be treated. In other words, to enact the golden rule. Now, this was kind of like unheard of in the business world, but he firmly believed that if you respected the people that walked in and you treated them with kindness, you treated them with a willingness to go out of your way to make their experience a good experience, they would be lifelong customers. And you know, I think about that. We don't do that anymore. I mean, it's hard when you go in a store to even get somebody to help you. And most of the time, if they come over to help you, they act like you've interrupted them, you know? And it feels like disrespect. Every one of us have experienced disrespect in one way or another. If it's that clerk in the store, it might even be a stranger on the street. And sadly, it could be friends. It could be family. We know it when it happens, and it makes us feel not good, right? It kind of knocks us down a peg when somebody disrespects. It's not fun. There's all kinds of emotions that go along with it. Am I right? Am I right? We all feel that way. The bottom line is that disrespecting the people that are in our lives will destroy the relationships that God intends for us to have. Do you agree? Yeah. All right, so in order to understand this, I thought I would begin by giving you a definition of the word respect, the opposite of disrespect. And it's in your outline. Respect is an act to give particular attention, consideration, a high or special regard for someone or something to esteem. Now, the flip side of that, we know how it feels for someone to treat us with respect. We know how to experience and how good it feels to experience this kind of a definition. When somebody shows consideration to us, when somebody shows special regard to us, and in ourselves, we know that was the right thing for them to do. So let's look at the opposite. This idea of disrespect. In your outline, I gave you the definition of that too. This is pretty harsh. It says to regard or treat with contempt or rudeness. And I got to tell you, that word contempt is a strong word. I looked it up because I was like, I'm not really sure what it means, but it sounds bad, right? And so I looked it up. It says contempt is a feeling with which a person regards anything considered mean, vile, or worthless, to disdain or scorn. It is the state of being despised, dishonored, or disgraced. That's pretty rough. I mean, it just is. And if we do that to the people that God's put in our lives, it ain't going to take long to destroy those relationships. Because we've talked all along that God's plan from the beginning was us to be in relationship. He never intended for us to be alone. He put people in our life for the express purpose of us learning how to interact with them, learning how to communicate with them, learning how to relate to them and with them. And so I think it behooves us to figure out how to keep from disrespecting the people that are in our lives in the first place. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 44 says, "You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you." Jesus commands us to love everybody. And I can't help but wonder God's providence and God's plan. I'm talking about we're supposed to love everybody, and last night was an example of people hating people. Last night was an example of anger and disdain and disgrace. Yet God says that's not how we're supposed to act at all. If we're believers, we need to work hard to make sure that we're not disrespecting the people that God's put in our lives. Otherwise, how in the world is the world going to tell we're Christians to start with? You know, Jesus says they'll know us by our actions. They'll know us by the way we act. We're supposed to act different than the world acts. There was a famous preacher, famous theologian, biblical writer back in the 1800s. His name was Dr. Andrew Murray. And he said this, and I love this. He says, "My relationship with God is part of my relationship with men. Failure in one will cause failure in the other." That's powerful. So how do we do in this area? I think we need to approach every relationship we have the same way that J.C. Penney approached business. We need to be treating others the way we want them to treat us. I mean, that sounds so simple, but I'm not sure it really is. So in your outline, I want to look at some questions that I think will help us get a handle on this. So if you got your outlines, let's look at it. Some questions to answer. The first one is this: has my attitude been right? Well, what does that mean? Well, we're talking about having an attitude that says, I want to do the right thing all the time. It almost sounds like integrity. And as a matter of fact, it really is. It really is. When we set out to do the right thing, the right way, every single time, we're being men and women of integrity. And if we're men and women of integrity, then we shouldn't be disrespecting the people that God has placed in our lives. We need to do the right thing in every relationship. We need to do the right thing in our marriages. We need to do the right thing in our work relationships. We need to do the right thing in the community in which we live. And a lot of folks say, that's not a problem, you know. I could do the right thing. I could do it right all the time if only the other people in my life would. You fill in the blank. Measure up to my standards. Look at everything and see it the way I see it. Problem is, we don't. We don't. You know, there ain't two people on this planet that are the same. We're in the middle of niche class, and yesterday I shared those statistics with the folks taking niche. By the way, we got about 8 or 9 people taking niche, and it's amazing. But one of the things I told them yesterday morning is that people smarter than me, sociologists, people that like to play with numbers, the odds of 2 people on this planet having the exact same DNA is the number 1 followed by 400 billion, 200 million zeros to 1. Okay? And what that says simply is this. There has never been a person on this planet, nor will there ever be a person on this planet from the beginning of time to the end of time that is just like you. We are all a creation, a masterpiece of God. And therefore, we're different and we're unique. And we're going to see things different. We're going to think things different. We're going to have different opinions about almost everything. One of the things that I realized as a police officer, if you're working a wreck, you know, and you got like 4 or 5 other people that saw the wreck happen, it amazes me, and Danny can attest to this, and so can Don. You get their statements, and it's like they weren't even on the same planet. I mean, there's nothing. Maybe they got the color of the car right, but that's about it, right? Not generally. Here's the deal. We're so different. We see things differently. Nobody is going to see things the way you see them. Maybe generally, all right? But there's going to be difference. Trust me, ain't nobody going to measure up to your standards. And guess what? You ain't measuring up to theirs either, okay? So you can't say, I'll do the right thing, but it's the other people. That's not what the golden rule says. The golden rule says you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus didn't say any of this kind of stuff. Jesus said, hey, you love people no matter what, okay? You love people no matter what. Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 says, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. You see, there's really 2 ways of operating in this world, especially when it comes to like giving your time, giving your talents, giving money. Here's the 2 ways. And everybody falls into one of these 2. One group of people gives in hopes that they're going to get something out of it. And there's another group of people that gives without any expectation of getting anything. And let me give you an example of the first. Giving with hopes of getting something out of it. Guys, sit real still because you've probably done this. You buy your wife a 70-inch 4K television for her birthday, all the while thinking, I can't wait for football season. You're giving something in hopes of getting something. You ain't going to get blessed for that, okay? The other way is giving without any expectation of anything. And guess what? That's what Jesus was talking about. The best way that we show our love to the people that are in our lives is to freely give whatever it is they need just because we want to. We sacrifice our feelings for the other person's feelings. So the first question you have to answer is, has your attitude been right? The second question we need to answer is, do you have an attitude of success? Well, what does that mean, Pastor Steve? Well, hang on, I'm going to tell you. Jesus once made a simple statement, perhaps the most simple statement he ever made in his ministry, but it's also probably the most profound and important thing he ever said in his ministry. And it's also one of those things that literally, honestly, it's impossible for you and me to do without the power of Holy Spirit in our lives. And it is the attitude that J.C. Penney adopted. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Here it is. Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. This is the essence of all that is taught in the law and the prophets. Jesus' whole ministry was centered around seeking God's blessing. But right here in the middle of his ministry, at first glance, when you see this, it seems like he's throwing a curveball. You know, not only do we have to live in a way that pleases and honors God, Jesus is saying we have to live in a way that puts us in a right standing with the people that are in our lives. Jesus says that if we treat others the way we want to be treated, we're going to receive God's blessing. And if we don't treat others the way we want to be treated, God's going to withhold his blessing on us. See, this is really important. You and I are evaluated by God. He watches us and he evaluates us and he rewards us in direct proportion to the way we treat the people that he's put in our life. It's that simple. That's a walk in the park when the people in our life we like. It is, right? We'll go out of our way to help the people we like. But what about the other ones? What about the ones that grate our very last nerve? It's a little bit more challenging then, isn't it? It's a little harder thing to do, but to follow Jesus' command, we have to adopt an attitude of success, even around people that aren't easy to be around, okay? And that actually brings me to the third question. How do you normally treat others? You know, people are watching all the time. They're always watching you, especially people that not really sure about this God thing, right? And you claim you're a believer. You claim you follow Jesus. So they're going to be watching you. This is so apparent at school. This is so apparent in the community. This is so apparent in your work situation. They're watching you, okay? Reminds me of a story. A young boy and girl were going through the attic of their house, and they stumbled on some old boxes, some old stuff, and they opened up the boxes, and lo and behold, they ended up opening up a box with a bunch of love letters in it that their mom and dad had sent each other when they were dating or courting. And the boy asked his sister, "Are you sure these are from our mom and dad?" And she goes, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Well, they don't call each other those names." People are watching all the time. They're watching what we do. And every time we talk down to somebody, every time we talk negatively to somebody, our friends, our spouse, our kids, we're robbing them of their own self-worth. We don't even think about that. I mean, how often do you get tired? How often are you busy? And how often is stuff going on in your life? And because of that, you end up snapping at the people that are in your life. You end up being short with the people that are in your life. You understand when you do that, you're disrespecting them. You may not even realize you're doing it. There's so much stuff going on, and you've got deadlines you've got to meet. But that's no excuse. In those kinds of situations, if you're like me, it never even crosses your mind that you're disrespecting them. It never even crosses your mind that you're offending them, that you're hurting them, that you're tearing them down just because of what you say. We reach a point where we don't even realize that we're doing that to the folks in our lives. I read a story. I want to share it with you because I got to read it because I don't want to leave any part out of this. But a couple had been seeing a marriage counselor, and they had some problems. The counselor told the husband that he should be more attentive to his wife, that he should treat her lovingly, that he should remember what it was like when he was courting her. So one day he decided to do just that. He left work early and he went to the flower shop and he bought a dozen long stem roses. And then he went to the department store and bought a bottle of her perfect favorite perfume. And he walks in the house with the roses in one hand and the perfume in the other hand. And his wife sees him and she just busts out crying. And he's like dumbfounded. And she says, little Jimmy's been throwing up all afternoon. The dog got out of the yard, and it took me an hour to catch him and put him back in the yard. Your parents called, and they're coming for dinner, and now you come home drunk. Sad fact is, many of us, if we did that, that's what our spouse would think. That says something, doesn't it? Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 says, be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. If we want to hold on to the relationships God has established in our lives, if we want to make them mature relationships, if we want to make them healthy relationships, we need to learn how to embrace the golden rule. So the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we go about embracing this golden rule? And I think there's three things that we need to learn how to do. And I put them in your outline. The first one, and this may be hard, is to see that rule as a positive. See it as a positive. And what I mean by that is we embrace the golden rule as a good thing. And that sounds so simple when you say it. I think it was interesting. I remembered this in one of my classes from school, and I went back this week, and I was so proud of myself. I found the textbook that it was in. According to Jewish history, there was an event that took place somewhere around 20 BC, somewhere around there, okay, which is about 50 years before Jesus preached his Sermon on the Mount. 20 years or so before Jesus was born, and about 30 years after that when he was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. And according to this event, there was this Gentile that approached the most famous rabbi in all of Israel at that time, and his name was Rabbi Hayel. And the Gentile says, Rabbi, I tell you what, I will convert to Judaism if you can teach me the entire Jewish law while standing on one foot. Yeah. And the rabbi said, deal. So he stood on one foot, and this is what he said. Do not do to your fellow man what you hate having been done to you. Now, if you stop and think about it, that kind of sounds like the golden rule just kind of jacked up a little bit, right? It's actually the negative approach to the golden rule. Do not do to your fellow man what you hate having done to you. And that saying became famous. If you were Jewish, you'd heard that saying. It was just something you heard all the time, okay? And so there's no doubt when Jesus is doing his Sermon on the Mount, and he says what he says about the golden rule, the people had heard it before. But wait a minute, from a negative perspective. They had never heard this proclaimed in a positive light. And I was thinking about this. I'm not going to go as far as to say I had an epiphany, but it kind of hit me. And that is what the rabbi said, you can accomplish that by doing nothing. But you can't accomplish the golden rule unless you do something. See, if I do nothing, then I haven't done anything that it's nothing I would hate to have done to me. Doing nothing does nothing, right? But Jesus says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Which means I got to do something. I got to take an action. And I think that's really, it wasn't an epiphany, but I was like, wow, I could accomplish what the rabbi said just by keeping my mouth shut. But I have to actually get up and do something to accomplish the golden rule. Because what Jesus did is he took a very familiar saying, and in his Sermon on the Mount, he turned it 180 degrees. And to me, that was just wow. Doing unto others what we would have them do unto us requires that we act. Jesus is saying we need to look beyond the negative, and we need to get up and do something right, what I would want done to me. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. The second way to embrace the golden rule is to understand the rule completely. Understand it completely. Now, I'll be honest with you, when you say it, it's something a 6-year-old could understand. Do to others what you want them to do to you. When Jesus laid out this rule in Matthew 7:12, he said the rule sums up the law and the prophets. Well, what does that mean? Why did he say that? Well, he answered it in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So if you look at some of the things he says to do in the Sermon on the Mount, like, for example, in verse 21, don't believe me, go home and look it up for yourself. In verse 21, he says, don't kill people, don't murder, right? But that's negative. In a positive way, Jesus says right after that, he says, kind of be more proactive. He says, reconcile with the person you're at odds with. In verse 27, he's referring to adultery. Don't commit adultery, but that's negative. Jesus said we're supposed to love our brothers and our sisters and not look at them like some sex object. In verse 31, it's talking about not breaking your oath, which sounds negative. But Jesus said, if we are his people, our word is our bond. In 43, it says, don't show love towards your enemy. Love God and hate your enemy. But Jesus said, love your enemy, regardless of who they are or what they've done to you. Jesus said that the golden rule sums up the law and the prophets, because here's the deal. If you live out the golden rule, you ain't got to worry about the law. You will accomplish the law. If you treat other people the way you want to be treated, you don't have to worry about a whole lot of anything. Living by the golden rule enables people to totally and completely fulfill God's relationship requirements. And if you live by the golden rule, those relationships will be healthy. Those relationships will be maturing. And number 3, let me cover this one. Number 3, follow the rule every day. You got to follow the rule every day. Jesus says to do this in everything. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13 says, but encourage one another daily, as long as it's called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. See, if we live by the golden rule, we're not going to disrespect anybody. In fact, we're going to hold people in high esteem because, quite honestly, that's the way we want to be treated. If we follow that rule every single day, then we're never going to show disrespect to other people. Just simply do the right thing every time, every day. You see, Jesus knows that you and I can change the world. He wouldn't have told us to go and share the gospel if we couldn't. He knows we can. He knows that in order for us to do that, we have to do to others what we would have them do to us. And here's the other thing. Don't wait for them to do it first. Don't wait for them to do it first. We take the initiative. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22 says, now that you've cleaned up your lives by following the truth, love one another as if your life depends on it. All right, we're going to end this morning. But I've given in your outline a chance for you to apply the golden rule. And I really challenge you to do this. This week, what I want you to do is to write in that blank at the bottom of your outline the name of somebody that you're in relationship with. And what I want you to do, by writing their name in that block, you are saying, I commit to apply the golden rule to whoever it is. And then actually do it. If every one of us here and everyone that's watching online this morning, if we commit to do that, man, we can change some stuff this week. Last night is a great example of how screwed up our world is. Fixing it starts with us. I mean, it might be 350 miles from where that happened last night, but fixing it begins with us. Us doing what Jesus told us to do. Love the people that God has placed in our lives. So write down in your application on your outline the name of somebody. And here's the other thing. You're doing this without expectation of getting anything. Because if you write somebody's name down because, if you do something for them, they're going to scratch your back and it's going to be all great and we're going to sing Kumbaya, you failed. Do this without expectation of getting anything. I guarantee your relationships will change. Remember, God evaluates us by the way we treat the people He's put in our lives. I don't know about you, but I don't want to miss the mark. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for the example of the golden rule. Simple enough that a child can understand it, yet so profound and hard to do for adults. Father, give us what we need to apply the golden rule this week to the people that you put in our lives. Help us figure out something to do that blesses them without any regard or expectation of getting anything in return. Help us hit the mark this week. In Jesus' name, amen.